Whenever I have a window on one side, I like to place the hands on the opposite side to the window. What happens that way is that light falls on my hands and then it also falls on the food, whether I'm holding the food or I'm doing a sprinkling action, like maybe sprinkling sugar, sesame seeds. Light is falling on it. And what that does is it just looks beautiful because it creates these highlights on my fingers. And that really, really brings the hand to life. Hello, hello. This is your host, Dyutama, and welcome to My Food Lens podcast, where we talk about everything from food photography, styling, to business and mindset. After 15 years as an architect, I switched careers and I'm now a professional food stylist and food photographer based in Singapore. I'm also the founder of the business My Food Lens, where we help clients elevate their brand through drool-worthy photos. My motto is, put your best food forward. Well, here on this podcast, I promise to keep it raw and real and hope you find your answers, action, and inspiration as we move through the episodes. Hello and welcome to episode 40. Woohoo! We are at episode 40. I know it's become like kind of a pattern with me, right? Like every time I announce the episode name, I'm like, whoa, like a crazy person. But honestly, I do get excited every time I announce the episode number because we've come so far and we are literally less than 2 months away from hitting 1 year of My Food Lens podcast. Now that's unbelievable. That's incredible. And thank you very much because that wouldn't have happened if you were not here. So yeah, hello. My excitement is completely justified. And I hope to get you a little excited too today because we are talking about our favorite topic, light. So, you know how I always say that light is the backbone of photography? I truly, truly mean it. And I don't even need to say this, you already know this. So, in food photography, it is because of light that food looks delicious. It is light that makes food look so tasty. The light is what brings out that glossy texture of frosting, or those charred grill marks that we see on a tender piece of steak. Yep, that's light doing its magic. And you know what else looks good? Chocolate. So chocolate looks irresistible because of the way light falls on it. And it's light that makes beverages glow. And it is light that even makes cake crumbs look so damn tasty, right? So I don't need to tell you the importance of light. That's where I was going. You already know that compositions don't have to be magnificent, but the lighting has to be magnificent. That if the lighting is not right, no matter how much effort you put into your composition, it's not going to cut it. We're not going to be able to make it, man. All right. Which is why food photography starts with lighting 101. Like literally, that is the first step to even beginning our journey in food photography. All right, so today we are not going to go to 101. We're going to go just a little bit further today, and we're going to talk about a very specific direction, a very specific kind of light. And if you found the episode on creating depth in a flat lay, if you found that helpful, I think it was episode 35. So if you found that helpful, I have a feeling you are going to find this episode useful as well. All right. Hey, but before we go, can I just ask you for a very, very, very small favor? Can I just ask you to quickly rate and review this podcast? If you're listening on Spotify, if you could just hit the stars, if you're liking the podcast and the content, if you could just rate us, that'll be wonderful. And if you're on Apple Podcast, would you be able to rate us and also just write a few words if you find the podcast helping you and useful and you're enjoying the episodes, then your words will truly make my day. But more than anything, I would love to get more guests for you, better content for you. And it is your rating, your review, which will allow me to grow and get to those guests and get to that content. So your stars and your words mean a lot. And you should know that. So before we hit the lights, if you could just take a few minutes to rate and review the podcast, I'll be so eternally grateful. All right. With that, Let's move on to the light. All right. Today we are talking about one direction of light, which is sidelight. It is a kind of light that you can create. So, what is sidelight? Let's just start with what is sidelight. Now, if you shoot a natural light, light is everywhere. Light is just everywhere. But in food photography, we have an extra challenge that we need to create the light that we want for our tasty, tasty, tasty food, right? We need to create that light. That is our challenge. Now, if we put food on a backdrop and we take the shot as it is, how is it any different? Like, how are we setting ourselves apart from the other person, right? We are professionals, we are hobbyists, we love food photography. So we want to understand what really makes and breaks that particular food photo. How can we make it look so damn delicious that somebody just wants to grab that photo and eat it up? All right. So that's our job. How does our photo look better than someone else's? That's what we are trying to do. And also, what we are trying to do is do justice to the food that we have labored and cooked or, bought and spent money on. So, how can we do all of those things? We can do all of those things by creating light, by tackling that challenge that we have as food photographers. So, when we want to take a photo of food, we can create three different styles of light. I'm certain that you already know about this, but if you don't know, I'm just very quickly going to give you a brief overview of what these three different styles of light are. All right. So the three different styles are actually the three different directions in which you can throw light into a composition, in which you can bring light or create light for your food. Now, whether you are using artificial light, whether you're using natural light, whether you're working in soft light or you are a harsh light person, these three styles remain the same and they are pretty much universal for any kind of light because these are the fundamentals, the basis, the foundation of light that we create in food photography. All right. And so just going back to those three styles, basically their names come from the direction that they fall from. So the first lighting style is side light, which is the one that we will cover today. And the second one is backlight. So it's coming from the back. It's called backlight. And then there's a third one, which is kind of a hybrid, a naughty one, but a very, very powerful one. And that is side backlight. So today we will be tackling side light. You know why? Because I actually wanted to cover all three, but it is impossible. It is impossible. Light is such a vast subject. You know how photographers say, I'm constantly a student of light. Yes, that is true. We all are. And it is such a vast subject that we need to absorb it in bite-sized information because it can get very confusing. It can get very overwhelming. And that's not what I want you to go through. All right. I actually want you to just take a little bit of this information so that you can apply it practically to your photo shoots, to your composition, and then take a little bit more and apply it. But if you're bombarded, then it becomes a bit hard. I mean, that's what happens with me. And that's why I just wanted to really, really, really dive into sidelight today and talk all about it. But if you are interested in knowing more about backlight and side backlight and where they are used and why they are used, you know what to do, right? You just need to email me. You just need to send me a DM on Instagram. Hey, DJ, can you cover those as well? We would love to hear it. Like, that's it. I'm on it. All right. So if there's enough interest around the other forms of light as well, I will be happy to create an episode around those. But let's get cracking on side light today. So side light is pretty much the light that comes from the side. All right. So when the light source is to the left of the camera, or to the right of the camera, it is called side light. All right. So I'm going to reference the position of the light with respect to your camera because you are standing where the camera is. So imagine left or right, your light is coming from there. All right. So now I'm going to take you into a scene. Walk into that scene with me. We are going to constantly walk into that scene throughout the episode so that we understand better and we can visualize the impact of the light and where it's working and where it's not. So that's my idea with today's episode, to really dive into how I use it, why I use it, where I don't use it, and how we can maximize this light direction. Come with me, imagine this scene. All right. Now you are shooting a bottle of water today. Nothing complicated. You have a backdrop, and the bottle is standing straight on the backdrop. It's a straight on angle. Your camera is directly in front of the bottle. You can see the entire front of the bottle. Then you have a window, and then your window is to the left of the bottle. So you're standing straight, you're looking directly at the bottle, and to your left is a window. Now, the window is exactly to the left of the bottle. It is not behind the bottle, it is not in front of the bottle. Basically, it is parallel to the edge of your backdrop and almost going to the same length of your backdrop, running all the way from the beginning of your backdrop to the end of your backdrop. If it's sitting on a table, then it's, the length of the table. So you understand where I'm going with this, right? It's like your left arm and your right arm. When you spread them out to the sides, your arms are not behind you. The arms are not in front of you. The arms are directly on your sides, like a 90-degree angle to your torso, right? So that is what we are looking for in sidelight. It's a pure 90-degree light that is coming. And it is to the left or to the right of your camera. And in this situation, we're going to deal with it to the left of the camera. So now how do we read sidelight? We said that light is everywhere, right? So even if we have a window, let's say to the left of a composition, then how do we make sure that we are really, really getting pure sidelight, like not any other direction, but really pure sidelight? How do you read that? How do you make sure that what you're working with is pure sidelight? So the way to study light is actually to study its shadows. The way to read it is through its shadows. So look at your composition and look at the shadows that are falling on the backdrop. Now, what are we looking for? When we work with sidelight, what are we looking for? We are looking for a shadow which is directly to the side of the bottle. If the window is to the left, that means that your shadow should be falling on the right. So not back, not front, not diagonal, but a true 90-degree shadow to the bottle. And if you are getting that, that means you have true sidelight. And let's say that you are not getting that, then what do? Remember, we talked about this in the flat lay episode? Well, your window is fixed, but your composition is not. So if you're looking for true sidelight and you just watch the direction of your shadow, if it's diagonal, go back or come forward, whatever you need to do. Move your composition if you're looking for true sidelight so that your shadow is exactly opposite the window and it is not falling at an angle, but 90-degree to the bottle. All right. And let's say you're using artificial light, then make sure that your softbox is set up exactly to the left or right of the composition so that your shadow falls exactly opposite to it. Not diagonally, not in front, not at the back. So that's how we read sidelight. Now let's talk about sidelight and what makes sidelight and why is it like the coolest light? It is really a great light direction. And let me tell you why. First of all, have you worked with sidelight, like pure sidelight? Because if you have worked with it, you know that it is amazing. Everyone goes crazy about backlight and the power of backlight. I get it. Even I do. But I feel like sidelight is the unsung hero. Really. And you know why? Because it is so versatile. This light direction is like that friend who gets along with everyone. We all have that one friend in the group who gets along with everybody. They have no hidden agenda. They have no propaganda. They're always wishing everyone well, and they're always out to help everyone. Well, if sidelight was a person, sidelight would be exactly that kind of a person. So now you know why I call it the unsung hero and the most very awesome, versatile light direction. And why I say so is because number one, is that sidelight is actually one of the easiest directions to work with. What happens is that when light falls directly, like on the side of the subject, it creates these highlights on one side and it has shadows on the other. It's very clear. Highlights and shadows. Now, the nature of sidelight is to please you. It's a people pleaser, all right? So when the light falls on the subject, and it is divided evenly across the backdrop, it does not create too much drama. All right, which means that it does not create too much contrast in the area that it is falling on. There is a sense of balance in sidelight. All right, now there are exceptions to this. Like, for example, if your light source is too small or it's too far, or your light does not reach the back of the backdrop, then of course you're going to have greater contrast, you're going to have more drama, more highlights, more shadows, like lots of tonal contrast happening. But as long as your window runs through the length of the backdrop, it's evenly and directly to the side of the backdrop, you are going to receive even lighting and there's going to be no unwanted drama. All right. So the other reason why I really like sidelight is because it is very easy to manipulate sidelight. And again, I'm speaking relatively. So I'm saying relative to backlight and side backlight, it is relatively easier to work with sidelight. Now, how? Well, we are back to the bottle composition. All right, stay with me. So the bottle is in front of you. You are at the camera. The window is to the left of the composition. All right. And you're getting highlights on the bottle on the left side because that's where your light is coming from. And on the right side, you are getting shadows. All right. Now you're here. Are you here with me? Left side has highlights, right side has shadow. If you want more shadow, what do? You simply move the composition either further away from the window. What will that do? It will take you away from the light source, which means that you will have deeper, darker shadows. But let's say you're going for something more easy, more bright, more airy, and you want less shadows. What do? You just place a white foam core or a white bounce card directly opposite the window on the right side of the composition where you're getting the shadows, all right? And what it does is that it will just bounce the light back and it'll open the shadows. So it's very, very straightforward. And because the direction is left and right, it just becomes very easy to manipulate it. And you can easily control how much you open the shadows by moving your bounce card. So if your bounce card is much closer to the composition, your shadows will really open up. And if your bounce card is a little bit further, you will have a little bit darker shadows. And the more you move your bounce card at the back, the darker your shadows will continue to be. So those are some like very easy ways to manipulate sidelight, right? And why I say that it's relatively easy is because it does not cause too much drama and your food is not getting too much contrast from every side that it doesn't throw you off. You have a lot of control in the way the light is moving, how much contrast you're creating, what is the depth of the shadows, how much highlights you need. It's really a lot under your control, which is why I feel that it is relatively easier compared to backlight, especially, right? Left or right, it's super duper straightforward. And also we get the best of both worlds, which is highlights and shadows. So we never lose depth, right? I also feel that sidelight is one of the most accessible directions. Do you agree? Like, I don't know, I'm an architect, right? So I kind of also see it from that perspective. Our bedrooms, our kitchens, they are mostly designed with windows on the side. So if that is where you shoot and you have a window to the side, then take advantage of it. You have sidelight available to you. And maybe I'm just generalizing and maybe it doesn't work in your space, but I feel like somehow the way our bedrooms and our main spaces are designed, usually windows are to the side. And so it just becomes a very natural direction for us to work with, right? But again, it depends on what and where you are, right? The other reason why I say that if sidelight was a person, it would be a very popular person, a very popular friend, is because it works well for almost all kinds of food, The direction, it evenly lights that you can use it for a range of subjects, like whether it's chocolate or it's drinks or it's cake or it's whatever, I feel like you can really work with sidelight. You can't say the same about other directions of light. They are a bit more complicated and tricky. And not every subject looks good in backlight or side backlight. But sidelight, he's like, yeah, man, I got you. I got your back. So always maximize or always work with sidelight with that perspective that sidelight is there to help you. And if you're ever stuck It is this lighting direction that will come to your rescue. Just quickly, quickly go back to it if you're ever stuck. Speaking of that, let's talk about when to use sidelight and when to avoid. So there are some foods that we clearly know that they look good in certain kind of light, like for example, backlight for honey and beverages. But when do we use sidelight? Like what are the situations where we would fall back on sidelight? So I want to run through situations where I really do fall back on this lighting direction. And number one is to create mood. So I like to use sidelight when I either want to create a bright and airy mood. And the reason is what I just told you, and that is because sidelight gives us a very balanced light. If I have an even length of a window that runs along my composition, then it's very easy for me to manipulate it. It's also very easy for me to flood and bring a ton of light across my composition with, subtle shadows, manipulate it nicely. And so I've got a really nice, bright and airy mood. So whenever I'm looking for something like that, something that has less drama, then I like to fall back on sidelight. So my number one situation is when I'm creating a bright or airy mood. All right. The second situation in which I use sidelight is when I'm using hands in frame. Yep. So going back to the bottle composition, I have the window to the left. So whenever I have a window on one side, I like to place the hands on the opposite side to the window. What happens that way is that light falls on my hands, and then it also falls on the food, whether I'm holding the food or I'm doing a sprinkling action, like maybe sprinkling sugar, sesame seeds, light is falling on it. And what that does is it just looks beautiful because it creates these highlights on my fingers. And that really, really brings the hand to life. I would say, yeah, it literally brings the hand to life. Now, if my hand was on the same side of the window, what would happen? Number one, I would definitely block the light because, boss, I'm not a small person, all right? So if I'm standing in front of the window, I am going to block the light. And we don't want that unless, of course, we are trying to create shadow and blocking light for some other reason. But if we are not, then I wouldn't stand there. Second thing is that the light would fall from the back of my hand and my hand would look a bit dark. It might look aged. It might look tired. So when light falls directly on your hands, they just look brighter, fresher, younger, and they bring a ton of life into our composition. So I like to use side light when I'm using hands in frame because of the way they directly fall on my hands and they can actually make it look prettier and nicer. All right, and also the food. Speaking of which, I come to the third point where I use sidelight. So I like to use sidelight when I'm working with time-sensitive food. Basically, I like to simplify my life. Sometimes situations are very stressful and sometimes we can only handle one challenge in a shoot, right? So if we have more than one big complexity in the photo, then it just becomes too much. It becomes too much. All right. So let's say I'm shooting ice cream or frozen drinks or even, fresh herbs. Oh, goodness. Aren't they a pain? But they look beautiful. I know. All right. So if I'm shooting ice cream or frozen drinks or fresh herbs, they are all time sensitive food. And I need to move fast. I need to really, really pay a lot of attention to the food, that it's staying in its form. And I can't be divided in my attention, right? So I just like to simplify my life by not overcomplicating the light. You know what that means? That means that I don't create complex lighting for complex foods. Yep, I just choose my battles, just like in life. I choose my battles. So I choose one big challenge. If my job is to make that ice cream look like $1,000,000, well, then my focus is for sure going to be that I create the texture, I get the scoop right, I make sure that the light is falling in the right place and creating those highlights. I'm getting the very oozy, that very tempting texture of ice cream that I want to convey to the audience. And I can most definitely create it with sidelight. I know that for certain, all right? I also know that sidelight is much easier for me to manipulate and to work with. So I will not overcomplicate my shoot, especially if it's a client shoot, right? I will not overcomplicate it. I will choose one thing which is challenging. And if food is the challenging part, then I'll make lighting simpler. And sidelight is usually my go to in such situations. So the other situation in which I like to make my life simpler is when the composition is crazy. So, you know how sometimes we have to create these large feasting table shots? Like I have to do that many times for my clients. And at that time, I know that my focus really has to be on the food. I have to get my focus correct. I have to make sure that I'm capturing all the details of the food. I have to make sure that my chicken skin looks perfect and, the salad does not wilt away and look like it's been lying there for 100 years, right? And there are at least 10, 15 different dishes on the table. I have to work with composition and balance. So those things are really taking my attention there. I know that sidelight will work beautifully for it. Side along the long side. That's the direction that will work. If I put it along the short side, might be a bit too much drama unless I'm using two sources. But again, that gets a bit complicated. So let's not go there. That's for another episode for another time. So let's just go back to our flat lay where we are shooting 10, 15 different foods on a table. If I have sidelight, which is along the longer side of that table, then I know that I'm creating, like my life is simplified and I'm creating a very powerful, a very natural scene. So my composition is complex, but my light is not. It is familiar to me. I know how to work with it. All right. So that is another situation where I like to use sidelight. But if I had to talk about a situation where I don't use sidelight, where it is really not my light of choice, then I would say that it would be when I'm shooting some kind of a reflective surface, or, I have reflective props, shiny props on my set, or I have glassware in this scene. So, like a drink or a beverage. I know we have been like visualizing a bottle this whole time, and then I go ahead and say, oh, yeah, but this is the one situation where I would not use sidelight. Well, hear me out first. When we have a window to the side of that bottle, you know how I said you get highlights on one side and then you get shadows on one side? Well, guess what else you get with those highlights? You get the reflection of the window. Yes. When we have a reflective surface, when we have something like glass and we have a window light that is directly or adjacent to it, we will have reflections, and that is something, again, it depends on your design direction. But if you're not looking for that, it becomes like extra challenging to get rid of that reflection. So I try to avoid it. I try to avoid when I have a drink or a beverage, I try to avoid sidelight because I know that it's going to cause that line on the side of the glass or the bottle. But, also there have been situations where I've had a glass. So I'm using a glass in a shot, but it's not a beverage or drink. That means light cannot go through it. It's opaque. It's solid. Like I've had dessert in a glass. All right. So it's opaque, right? So obviously backlight wouldn't work for this because, hello, how will the light filter through my dessert, right? It wouldn't. So the dessert would look very dark, and then similar thing with side back. So I've used sidelight in these situations. And in that, I've tried to manipulate the reflection, move the composition a little bit to minimize the reflection, but kind of deal and live with the reflection, use it creatively, use it tactfully, So if I can't avoid it, then I find a way around it. But if I have a choice, if that is available to me, I try to stay away from sidelight when I have reflective props or I have glassware in the scene. And since I mentioned backlight here, I want to talk about something very important, something that I realized very late in my photography journey, and something that one of our leading photographers in the community actually brought it up. That's who I learned this from. And I want to share it with you so that you sound intelligent and you can also see that she has a great point. So there's a misconception about sidelight and backlight. Now, again, I want you to imagine this scene with me. So, when I started this episode, I said that sidelight is the light that you get when the source of light is either to the left or to the right of the camera. Okay, remember this as I talk through this section of our episode. Now, imagine you are shooting a flat lay. flat lay or a top down or an overhead angle, whatever you call it. Where is your camera? Your camera is on top, right? Your camera is on top. You are looking down below, straight down below, directly above the food. Now, a common misconception is that in a flat lay, when the light is at the top of the composition, most people call it backlight. All right. You know where I'm going with this? Hear me out fully, please. So imagine the bottle of water on the backdrop. You are now shooting in a top down angle. You're not standing straight. You're shooting top down. You're looking down at the bottle of water. What do you see? You see the rim of the bottle. You see the spout, right? You with me? You're with me? Yeah. Okay. Very cool. All right. So your light is placed where? At the side, right? We said the window is to the side. So all you have done is you've changed the camera position. So instead of shooting straight on where your light was on the left of the window was to the left, the window's still there. All you have done is you've come to a flat lay angle. So you are now looking top down and your light is still there. What do you think you're going to call that? Side light, right? Let's say your light can move. Now you move your light to the top of the composition, that is the head of the composition. So many folks call that light backlight just because it is in that position. It is at the head of your composition. Your camera is coming from the top. It's a top-down angle. You're looking down at your bottle. Your light is at the head of the composition and you're calling it backlight. Now, that is a misconception. That is not true. Because in a flat lay, in a top down, when your light is to the left, to the right, or at whatever position, honestly, it's still side light because the definition of backlight is the light that comes from the back of the food. Now, in a flat lay, how would you light the back of the food? You would light the back of your food if you were throwing light from underneath the food, if you had a glass table and the light was coming from below it, or if your food was transparent and was sitting on something that you could light it from the bottom. But that's not happening because we always see the light position in relation to the camera, not in relation to the food. So in relation to the camera, when you're in a flat lay position, no matter where your light is, it is side light, right? So this is something I learned from B. Lubis. And she's an amazing photographer. She's such an inspiration to all of us. And B brought this up, I think a few years ago, we were doing a backlight challenge. And a lot of folks were taking these photos in flat lay where the light was at the head of the composition and they were calling it backlight. And B's like, no, and she busted this myth for so many of us. And I wanted to share this with you today because I thought that this definitely is something very important because we always study the light in relation to the camera position. So backlight and flat lays, be very careful how you use that terminology when you're talking in the professional world. All right. So there you go. There you have it. We had this whole episode about sidelight, what it is, why it's your friend, situations in which I use it, I don't use it, how do you read it, all of this, I know that I described most of the situations with a disclaimer, and that is because there really is no rigid rule. I mean, it all depends on your concept, your direction, and what you are wanting to create, which is like any artist's work, correct? But my job here was to give you all the information so that you know how to utilize it to your benefit. So the next time you're shooting, you're stuck, what do you do? The next time you want less drama, what do you do? The next time you want your best friend on the set, who do you call? Sidelight. Hello. All right. So I've shared with you what works for me and, see if it works for you too. If you find something and you discover something new, please definitely share with me. And remember, if you're ever stuck, especially with relation to lighting, shift to sidelight. It is your best friend. It's a people pleaser. All right. I know this was a very packed episode. And if you need to hear it again, go back, hear it again. Also, hear it in relation to episode 35. I think these two go well together. That one is all about flat lays and how to create depth in flat lays. So I just love talking about light and I think you love hearing about it. So I hope that this episode was helpful to you and it helps you understand just a little bit better. Remember, sidelight is the popular friend. It will never fail you. With that, I'm going to take your leave. And if you have a question, if you want to leave a comment, if you discover something new, please drop me an email or send me a DM on Instagram. You know where to find me. It's all in the show notes below. I will see you next week with another episode. Bye bye.